Chapter 31, The Coming of the Age of Metal. When the thrill-seeker came back to his hunting party on the back of a docile quick spring, they were flabbergasted. A million colors flashed to him at once, asking all sorts of questions. The concept was difficult to explain to the others, as there were no words to describe what he had done. The closest thing he could come up with was that the beast was now like family. When he dismounted, the quick spring stayed within close range of him, not tearing off back to its herd as was expected. The thrill-seeker also did not try to put distance between them, preferring to stay in close proximity. One of the hunting party members tentatively asked if she would be able to ride it. The thrill-seeker was unsure, but gestured for her to try. No one had tried to mount a quick spring without trying to ambush it from above, so she was a little puzzled about how to get on its back. When she put her hands upon its back to try and vault herself up, a pang of unease blossomed in the thrill-seeker's family heart. It was a weaker connection than with other lizards, and didn't echo through his heart to those around him, a private connection between lizard and beast. The thrill-seeker put his hand upon the female lizard's shoulder to stop her, relaying his companion's unease at another being upon her back. He knew the quick spring was female by the shortness of her horns, but hadn't thought to refer to her as a she until they were connected. One did not typically care about the gender of prey, but now that she was a companion, it felt wrong to consider her an it. A tumult of emotions passed through the thrill-seeker as he looked upon his new companion and wondered if he would ever be able to consume quick spring meat again. His life had significantly changed in an instant, and he still did not know just how far this new connection in his heart would take him. The female lizard then desired to see the thrill-seeker upon his glorious steed once more, an acceptable alternative to riding the beast herself. Being unpracticed in mounting a docile quick spring, it was a bit of struggle and not at all graceful, but eventually he was again on the back of his companion and breathed a sigh of relief. He took his mount and walked in a circle around his party so they could stand in awe to their heart's content. They took their time seeing just how well the thrill-seeker could communicate his intentions to his quick spring, and found that so long as the requests remained simple, she was able to oblige. There were some requests she refused, like adding a second rider to her back, as she was again uncomfortable with the notion, and the thrill-seeker respected those feelings. After being asked again how the thrill-seeker had connected so deeply with the beast, the hunting party wanted to see if they too could claim a mount of their own. After several attempts at riding more quick springs, they found that the bond between the thrill-seeker and his quick spring companion was not one easily replicated. The thrill-seeker felt that their desire was not strong enough to jump-start the connection, which caused a bit of bitterness among the younger members of his party. Even if they knew that theirs was a whimsical desire created in the heat of the moment, it still put them out of sorts to be told so directly. The party returned to the colony a while after that. It was a quiet return with everyone, except for the thrill-seeker atop his mount, plodding along. The younger members were a mix of downtrodden and miffed at their failure. The thrill-seeker wanted to help them if they truly desired to ride on the back of a quick spring, but he wasn't sure how to encourage them. The more experienced members of the party told him not to worry about it too much, and that even those negative feelings could be the spark they needed to turn their luck around. Things had a strange way of working themselves out at times. The party came back to many surprised looks. Colors of wonder and confusion appeared across many sets of scales. As members of the colony started to crowd around the strange sight of a lizard on the back of a quick spring, the thrill-seeker could feel his new companion becoming more anxious and distressed. He decided to remain near the border of the colony where there were less lizards and try to relieve his companion of her fears. The party went their separate ways to their homes from there, but rumors spread fast. Many lizards, especially young ones, went to go visit the docile quick spring. The children also wanted to ride the beast, but were content with petting her fur. She seemed more comfortable among the small lizards than the adults, and the thrill-seeker thought she may eventually overcome her fears so long as he took things slowly with her. As the older members of the party predicted, two of the younger party members became even more driven to succeed after their repeated failures to bond with a quick spring. While other parties focused on hunting as normal, the thrill-seeker's party had become devoted to trying to make connections with the quick springs. Those that didn't have the desire to ride the quick springs themselves assisted the other members that did, and as the days passed more lizards found themselves able to create that special bond with the quick springs when their desire synced with the heart of the beast. The lizard society was once again headed for change thanks to the thrill seeker. The new docile quick springs quickly formed a herd of their own that wandered around the borders of the colony. There were some quick springs that preferred to stay close by their bonded lizards, but most were fine being with the herd until they were needed by their lizard companion. The lizards immediately noticed the need to differentiate the bonded quick springs from the wild herds used for food, and began to decorate their mounts as they would themselves. Necklaces were most common, followed by horn ornaments, to show that these quick springs were part of the colony. Young born to the docile herd, while wary of the lizards, seemed more keen to accept their presence than their wild-born cousins, and made them easier to bond with. It also became more apparent as time went on which lizards were more adept at bonding with a quick spring by the feelings exuded from their family heart when they looked upon the tamed beasts, although none were barred from at least trying to bond. And just as some lizards went about their lives not caring whether they rode a quick spring or not, there were also quick springs that stayed wild at heart, never bonding with a lizard, though some remained content to stay with their herd. When the thrill seeker was much older, thanks to the many lizards that now bonded with the quick springs, expeditions to the old forest became possible. A distance that would have taken many moon cycles to walk could now be covered in a matter of days. They avoided the unstable walking bridge that had gone into disrepair, and aimed for the northern end of the landmass where the river had yet to completely sever through to the other side of the sea. The expeditions were often a pleasant ride until they came to the areas desecrated by the volcano. For the new generation that hadn't lived through the destruction, even they could hear the echoes of the crying earth as they gazed upon the charred landscape. Among the blackened husks of trees there was little life. The feeling cast a pall over the explorers, come to see if they could find colonizable pockets of green forest among the debris, or if anything was salvageable. The quick springs were usually uncomfortable in these areas that offered few places to hide from predators, but the comfort of their riders were able to still such fears to a tolerable amount for all but the most skittish. The riders were also reversely assured by their companions, relying on their heightened senses while they were on high alert to be watchful for potential danger. At the lead, the thrill seeker, now aged and experienced, led his troop through the routes he had seen a dozen times before. Despite his previous expeditions, he had not become numb to the sight of black shells of homes as they passed through old colony territories, and all who rode through the darkened roads experienced the same disquieting feelings upon seeing the rubble of former civilization. Perhaps it was my own memories causing phantoms to appear in their hearts as they tread once lively ground, now desolate. As they gazed upon the burned and broken structures, seeming as if they would crumble at any moment, my memories overlaid on the scene. Where they saw a blackened hut, I saw a family of lizards going about their daily life. A black streak of soot was a common road traveled by many to the center of the colony. The ghosts of the past filtered in among the debris, and it was like I was losing them all over again as they faded from view. Nearly everything we had been through together lied on this side of the river, and to see it all but dead shadowed my heart in sorrow. The only touch of color along the dark ground were small isolated shoots of green, plants and weeds attempting to reclaim the burned land, but not in any large amount. Likely they were wayward seeds, caught adrift on the wind and made to take root in the inhospitable lands. Periodically there would be small patches that had been able to thrive, but they were few and far between. But even so, the small amount of green was a tiny signal of hope. As the greens withered, they gave nutrients to the earth to help new plants survive, and in time, the forest would again come alive. So for now, although the phantoms and ghosts of a better time still haunted the spaces between the dead trees, they would eventually fade and give way to a new future. That future, however, would come far sooner than I expected, and certainly not in any way I could have foreseen. The expedition troop was heading into new territory, nearer to the volcano than they'd ever been. The mountain still smoked every now and then, and sometimes at night you could see a bright light trickling down the side, but no more large eruptions occurred now that a pathway had been opened. Still, it was unnerving to draw near, having seen the aftermath of its destructive power firsthand. As they walked along the old roads, a call came from the back of the troop. The thrill seeker at the front turned around on his mount, a son of his first docile quick spring, and headed towards the back of the pack. There he found a few dismounted lizards inspecting something on the ground. They were in an area affected by lava flows, the farthest reaches of the hot fingers from the days of the eruption. It had long been cooled, but it was still a strange sight. Long lines of black lumps, both smooth and bizarre, caressed the ground like an alien hand. Like waves in the sea or folds of cloth, beautiful patterns adorned the quieted magma. But it was not those beautiful shapes that had attracted the attention of the lizards. Next to the mounds of lava rock there were glints of something in the ground. One of the lizards requested a tool, and hammer in hand, began to excavate the curious find. Bang bang, the hammer struck, ringing into the air as tension rose in the group, anticipating the find. As their emotions flowed into me, I was reminded of the first time I had ever seen my little lizards, and the little leader who had changed my life so significantly. Watching the actions mirrored here, I could see just how far they had come from the little lizards they used to be. With a last strike and some muscle power, a rock was finally pulled from the earth. The lizards had seen many beautiful rocks, but this was something altogether different. It shone with a brilliance unmatched by any rock, like a shell from the shore colonies that reflected all manner of colors. But this was not some brittle shell. The hammer that had freed it from the ground had become dull very quickly, but the rock itself was hardly damaged from the blows. As in every precious moment before this, I knew this one rock would again change their society in an untold amount of ways. There had been small sparkles in rocks from the mountains or the riverbed, but this piece was larger than the hand that held it. The aqua-colored shine extended like rivers over a brilliant orange surface, and it was beautiful to behold. The lizards would call it a shining rock, but I alone knew its true name. Metal. Chapter 32, Addiction. Upon unearthing that fine piece of metal, I was inundated with a myriad of memories. The history of my people truly began with the discovery of metal, such that all eras before it were lumped together as something occurring before history. The age of stone would come to an end, and then the age of metal would begin. From protective outfittings to great structures that touched the sky, metal was the beginning of it all. I looked towards the volcano and once again remembered the eyes of the hills. They had unsettled me and made me fearful, but perhaps with metal I could protect my lizards from whatever it was that frightened me. I could only hope so. After a bit more scouting around the lava flow trails, they found a few more pieces of shining rock, as they had come to name it, though none so pristine as the first. They collected them out of the black rock, eager to take their spoils back to the colony for the others to wonder at. The lava had done what I had yet to teach my lizards, turning raw ore into metal. No doubt the extreme heat of the earth's lifeblood had smelted many such beautiful pieces as it ravaged the land. But they could not simply rely on nature to refine the raw ore, they must learn how to create it for themselves. Although the expedition hadn't turned up any pockets of livable space, they were satisfied with the spoils they would bring home. Over the next few days it took for them to make their trek back to the river, I pondered how to give them the knowledge. I let my consciousness drift through the members of the expedition, feeling their connections to their quick springs and to each other, let the beating of their hearts lull me into a waking sleep. For moments at a time, I experienced the world as they did, the sounds, the sights, the smells, even the taste of the wind as it blew by. I especially relished the sensation of smell and taste, and most importantly, touch. They were feelings I lacked but in my own memories, and those paled in comparison to the real thing. Since I had merged with the thrill-seeker during his time of taming the wild beast, it had been a common practice for me to flit through the hearts of my lizards, living vicariously through them. I did not realize just how much I had missed the senses I lacked. It left dull ache every time I detached myself after indulging. It was like a drug, and I was thoroughly addicted. I did have my connection to the earth itself, but the nostalgia invoked from connecting to my lizards was incomparable. It was like trying to compare a plant to an animal, though they shared the same fundamental ability to live, die, feed, and breed, little else was similar. I wanted to drown myself in the sensations of my lizards. But if I let myself sink completely in, I was certain I would never resurface. It was an appealing end, one I now often contemplated pursuing. To let myself simply dissolve into them, leaving no trace of myself but for their family heart. It was a very selfish feeling. I knew it was selfish, yet I couldn't stop myself from staying just a little longer, wanting to have just a little more. I knew all the reasons I should stop, but those logical thoughts were often bypassed as I sought to let the feelings of reality wash over me. I told myself it would be fine as long as I didn't let it get out of control. But maybe it was already out of control. The downward spiral had caught me once again, and it was entirely of my own making. The longer it perpetuated, the further down I went. Even so, I felt I could stop at any time, I just didn't want to. Even if I knew it was a lie, I desperately wanted to believe it, because if I did not, I wouldn't be able to let myself indulge anymore. Just like an animal needs to eat, I felt a new need created within me that desired to experience all my lost sensations. It was a hunger that ate away at me. Every moment I did not indulge it, I thought about it, whether it was in the back of my mind or the forefront of my thoughts. And the longer I went without it, the louder the need became, the more I hungered for it. I had let my lizards become my addiction, and I used them to fulfill it. I felt guilty using them in such a way, they didn't even have the ability to refuse as I escaped inside their skin. For every touch they felt and sound they heard, I felt ashamed of myself, yet at the same time I relished in it. It was at once both blissful and remorseful, it was as if the beautiful chorus of living life slowly became a saddening elegy. Still, I always wanted more, even if it hurt me, even if it was wrong, I needed it. I felt like I might break apart without it. I no longer knew if I could be content with just existing anymore without the feeling of living. And then I suddenly realized my need had eclipsed my ability to overcome it. While deluding myself in physical sensation and lies, I had passed the event horizon, I could no longer escape. And even worse, I didn't want to. Chapter 33, The Collector. I needed help. I didn't want help, but I needed it. However, there was no one for me to turn to. My lizards had always been my salvation, but I couldn't bring myself ask them, not after I'd used them to fuel my need for physical sensation. The guilt ate away at me, and I began closing off parts of myself from them to keep them from seeing all the ugly and dirty pieces of me. I didn't want them to know, I wanted to hide it from them. If they knew, would they come to hate the very existence that tied them together? Would their revulsion of my depraved actions cause them to cut themselves off from me completely? I could only tuck myself away in a small corner and hope they did not notice. There had to be something else out there, anything else, that could help me. I could not ask them for help. As I lamented in my revelation, the expedition party made their way back to the main colony by the riverside mountains. The shining rock was received with looks of awe much as I expected. Some seashells and other items from the ocean had a similar sheen, but the exotic look of the metal fascinated the eyes. Some pieces were kept by the party members as trophies, while others were traded off. I followed the most pristine piece as it changed hands several times, still trying to think of a way to get them to understand its uses beyond a beautiful decoration. The task was made difficult by the constant distraction of attaching myself to various lizards. Even when I forced myself to stop for a moment of clarity, I could only find myself thinking about which lizard I was going to dive inside next. In the end, my thinking didn't get anywhere, and much time was wasted by my half-hearted efforts. The pristine metal eventually made its way into the hands of a lone lizard. He had separated from his bachelor group quite some time ago, but had yet to make a family. There was simply no lizard out there that tugged at his heartstrings more than any other. As I rested my existence inside him, I felt his confusion over his lack of family, wondering why he was so different from the others, hoping to find that spark that seemed to come to others so naturally. I could feel his desire to compromise his own feelings and simply live with a family so that he might feel normal. But it was no use, he could not force himself to love that which he did not. It was not his destiny to leave his legacy in his children. But he did desire some manner of legacy, he just didn't know what it was yet. He hoped the beautiful shining rock he just acquired might be able to tell him. He was lonely, not for lack of family or companionship, but exception. His lack of desire for a family separated him from others in a way that was not easily understood, and he began to avoid others for their constant reminders of his singlehood. Although their hearts were open to one another, it was still difficult to comprehend something they did not understand. It made for a very lonely existence when others did not understand you. Something tugged at the back of my mind as I thought of that, but I was too preoccupied with how the piece of rock felt in his hands. Its shape was a mess, the surface uneven and coarse, yet the few places that were flat felt so incredibly smooth. It seemed a contradiction of itself, confused on whether it should be bumpy and sharp or slick and smooth. The lizard found himself rubbing the smooth areas, enjoying the almost silky feel of it, something unlike he'd ever felt before. Not even a smooth rock had such a texture to it. If the whole piece could feel that way, he felt he'd enjoy it more. Otherwise, it only served to decorate his home among other oddities he had collected. The collector's home consisted of many odds and ends strung to walls or sitting on small tables and shelves. A wood carving made into a strange, twisting shape, driftwood that resembled a face if you looked at it from the right angle, dried out bodies of strange sea creatures that had been brought from the shore colonies. His home was full of such strange and wondrous trinkets. And now the coppery green shining rock, brought back from the home of his ancestors, graced his collection. He continued to hold it in his hands, thinking of where to place it. Inside his skin, I gazed at it with him, and I imagined the heat needed to soften it, the tongs that would hold it in place, the hammer that would strike when it was red hot, slowly beating it into a flat piece that would be smooth all over just like he desired. The process was more complicated than simple dream images could convey, and I still hadn't found the answer I needed to teach them such workmanship. Had they smelted the ore on their own, they may have figured out that heat could shape it in other ways, but this was simply handed to them already done, leaving no space to wonder how much further they could go with it. The lizard paused. He seemed uncertain about something. He turned the piece of metal over in his hands, pondering it. I could only think he must be imagining something about it. What caused the sudden shift in finding a place for it to rest to suddenly re-examining it? Nothing in his environment had changed, and I could only think he must have had some sort of epiphany. But that still didn't explain what had sparked it. It didn't seem like he was musing over the properties of the metal piece before this. I was the only one thinking about those kinds of things. Could it be me? While I rested inside the collector, layering my imagination upon reality, had he seen it? I almost couldn't believe it. But the way he looked at the shining rock, it seemed to make sense. There was a wonder in his eyes as he perceived it with new possibilities. He saw beyond the discordant surface to its heart that could be molded and shaped with heat and tools. This was what I had been looking for. If I could guide his hand as I had his imagination, the revolution of metal would take hold, and a new era of prosperity could begin. Chapter 34, Pieces of Separation. Tools. That was the first step. Without the proper tools, the refined ore could not be worked. Stone hammers were already a tool that saw normal use, and something like an anvil could easily be substituted with a large flat rock. Thankfully, the lizards already knew that adding air to fire helped increase the temperature and spread of the flames, and things like communal bonfires were fairly commonplace at night. Building something like an oven or furnace wasn't quite within the realm of possibility yet, but I hoped it would come soon in the future. That meant the main issue laid in what tool to use to hold the red-hot metal that would easily burn through scale and flesh. Something like tongs, or even the swiveling mechanism that made tongs able to clamp and release, was not yet known to the lizards. When it came to needing to grasp items, a hand was perfectly suitable, thus such tools that enhanced grasping had not yet been thought up. No matter how strong their scales were, however, it would not be able to withstand the heat needed to make metal malleable, not even a softer ore like copper. I spent the day thinking about what could possibly substitute for tongs while the collector went about procuring a stone hammer and finding a nice flat rock just like he had seen in his moment of inspiration. However, I still couldn't completely lose myself to thought. As the collector ran his hand over the relatively smooth surface of a rock, with all its minute points and divots, I was lost in evoked feelings of nostalgia. Days when I had been young, climbing on every surface I could get a hold of, a slip from which could easily injure my unscaled fleshy hands. Even the memory of pain and blood was a welcome one, for those were still precious and happy memories. Despite all the memories I had regained about my people, and the few I had come to know about myself, I still didn't know who I had been. The only truly intimate memory with others of my kind had been one of suffering and loss. The faces and even bodies of those that surrounded me in my memory were always mere blurs of moving shapes. I understood what they were, that they were people like me, but I could never get a good look at them or myself. When I tried to imagine what they looked like beyond the veil of obscurity, I could only liken their features to my lizards, even though I knew our hands had no scales. The shapes of my people and my lizards had become further blurred as I kept invading the strong and scaled bodies. I was losing sight of who I had been. And maybe that was okay. From what I had seen of myself, I probably wouldn't like myself very much anyway. I left my internal introspection at that, and enjoyed the warm twinge of heat against the collector's scales as he sat by the bonfire with close friends. They inquired into his spirited mood, and he tried to explain as best he could the flash of inspiration he had gotten concerning his small hunk of shining rock. But without seeing that vision for themselves, they found it hard to understand. Once again, the collector was further separated from others who did not understand him, nor his vision. But this time, he could show them what he had seen. This was something tangible that he could teach them, and if it all worked as he had hoped, perhaps this piece of separation could turn into a link that would connect him more closely with others. That was the hope he felt inside. To the collector, this was more than simply learning to shape metal, it was what might finally connect him to others, that connection he always seemed to be lacking. Even if they didn't understand his strange tastes in decor, nor his familial preference, if it was something they could hold in their hands. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crack in the fire. A log split apart, causing a small chain reaction of shifting wood that sent up sparks into the night sky. A small piece of burned wood escaped the fire, landing close to the collector. It was warm but cooled quickly, and from the looks of it, it was only charred, not completely burnt into charcoal. He was about to throw it back into the fire, but at the last moment stayed his hand. Or rather, I was the one that stayed his hand. The more I looked at the charred wood, the more I understood. The collector was throwing it back into the bonfire because it would be useless at starting another fire. Wood that had already been charred was hard to reignite, since wood doesn't burn twice. About the only way to reignite it was to throw it into the depths of the bonfire and let the flames lick it until they finally found a fresh area to burn. But wasn't that exactly it? The charred wood, that was the answer I had been looking for. It certainly wasn't the most refined tool, but once they mastered the art of metalsmithing they could make better tools. All it had to do was be a catalyst for the future. As I made this connection, so too did the collector. He turned the warm piece of burned wood over in his hand, once again seeing the possibilities it held. This was it, we could do this. The pieces were all assembled, and come morning light, the real work would begin. Chapter 35, The Ring. It had been relatively easy to make long charred handling tools the next morning. They weren't anything revolutionary or overly sophisticated, but they could work like chopsticks in pulling the metal out of the fire, and simply using one stick to keep the metal in place while the hammer took to it would be plenty fine. It was simple and crude, but it would work. The flat rock the collector had found was too large to move, so he instead set up his work area around it. A hole was dug into the ground, then filled with kindling, wood, and charcoal from last night's bonfire. A small nook was dug into the side to place a blowing pipe, made from the stem of a sturdy and hollow plant, which would heat the fire. The hammer was set onto the large stone, awaiting its turn to be used, and the hunk of green-veined, orange-colored copper glistened in the now afternoon light. The collector practiced moving the hunk with the two sticks, figuring out how to balance it between, and just how much pressure to use. When he was confident he could move it and turn and hold it as he liked, it was finally time to begin. Tension and excitement filled the both of us, so eager were we to get started. Using the techniques created by Firestarter, and further perfected by the generations after, the collector lit the pit fire, then placed the metal ore inside. He capped the hole, sealing in the heat, then blew long breaths into the blowpipe, the fire crackling with every blow. The first time he checked on the metal, it was not quite the red hot he had seen in his vision, and returned the cap to the hole and kept the fire burning. It was a little disappointing, but he hoped it was mere impatience on his part, and not that this plan was doomed to failure. A short while after, when he checked on it a second time, he found exactly what he had been waiting for. The chunk of metal glowed with heat. The radiant refined ore looked like something otherworldly, and the collector was stunned for a moment, captivated by its alien glow. To him, it resembled a red version of the lizard's blue word for family heart, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he would connect to this metal the same way the riders connected to their quick springs. He was entranced for but a moment, then snapped out of his daze and back to reality. It was time. Just like my vision had showed him, he saw now that he could make it real, that it wasn't just an absurd daydream that had led him this far. He grabbed the hot metal with his 2 charred sticks and carried it to the flat rock. With an audible sizzling, the sticks managed to catch fire from the sheer heat of the collector's makeshift oven, but after he set the metal down, a good strong breath blew it out. They were only on fire for a few seconds, so the wood inside the blackened char should still be strong enough to carry out its job. He drew his hand close to the, now literally, shining rock, and felt the immense heat pouring off the lighted hunk. It would be dangerous to touch, and he could already see it was burning the impurities on top of the flat rock black. Now came the moment of truth. He took the stone hammer into one hand, and 1 charred stick into the other. With the stick, he held the metal in place, then raised the hammer high above his head, and with all his strength brought it down upon the shining rock. He could feel it through his entire body when he struck it. It did not immediately flatten, it didn't even look like he dented it, but he could feel that it had given way ever so slightly. He raised the hammer again, and struck. Over and over, he hit the metal. When the heat began to die down, he moved it back to the makeshift furnace to reheat it. His muscles were already aching, but he didn't want to stop. Already its shape was beginning to change. The top where he continued to strike was becoming flatter, and its sides bulged from the mass trying to run away from the hammer. The collector's body became hot from the strenuous work, and he found himself panting with his mouth open to release the heat trapped by his scales. It was hard work, but he relished in it. Just as the metal was being forged into something new, the collector could feel himself changing as well. He was heated from the inside just like the metal, and it made him feel all the more connected to it. As he continued to work the metal, flattening it to have as much smooth surface as possible, it began taking on a disc-like shape. He was filled with a fervor, and though his muscles rebelled against the abuse, he didn't dare stop until he was finished. Again and again he swung the hammer. He could feel it was almost complete. Though simple in design, it was like nothing the lizards had ever created before. And then, with another swing of the hammer, his wooden tool lost its grip on the hot metal, and the almost disc tumbled down from the stone. As the roundish shape of metal fell, a memory surged, overlaying itself on the scene I saw through the lizard's eyes. A round piece of metal also fell in that memory, though its center was hollow. I watched in slow motion as the coppery orange, no, silver shape descended to the floor. Inlaid with precious stones, I knew it to be valuable, but not for the rarity of the ring itself. The worth of the ring lied in the one that wore it, the one I had given it to so long ago, when I had pledged my love to them until my dying days. It hit the ground with a sharp ting. The sound itself was small, but the echo I heard inside myself drowned out all other noise. The significance of that sound hit me like the collector's hammer on the hot metal. Every bounce occurred in slow motion, the subsequent tinging sounds bouncing off the walls and the hard ground, each echo overlapping the other. It finally came to rest, but the sound still echoed through my nearly hollow heart. I could only see a vague shape in front of me, all that remained of my significant other, my better half. They had taken the ring off of their own accord and let it fall to the ground unceremoniously. I was appalled. Why would they do this? We were supposed to be together until the end of our days, that was the promise we had made. But now it was crumbling, it was over. I thought I had lost everything of myself in the fire, but that one ring was truly the last piece of me. The last small vestige of my old self faded away from my heart with the last echo of the fall. I wanted the ring back on the finger where it had stayed for years. The sudden emptiness inside was so complete it made me desperate for something, anything to fill it. Even if it wasn't real, even if I had to pretend it was true, it could eventually become true, right? A tumult of emotions surged, desperate for escape. But it was not to be. A rage lied within those emotions, and it was powerful, and hateful. I wondered why they would ever leave me like this. I found myself yelling, and though I didn't understand the words, I understood what they meant. I was pained, tortured, I didn't understand. Did I even want to understand? Raw emotions flowed through me, they were sad, they were hateful, they spoke untruths that I convinced myself to be real in my madness. I was in turn looked upon with pity and regret. No, no, don't look at me like that. I'll take back everything I said, just stay. Don't turn away, look at me. Don't walk away, come back. Please, don't leave me, I need you. Don't leave me alone. But I didn't say those things. I kept them all down, swallowed them, choked on them, and just watched as they left, silent but for my own inner turmoil. Maybe if I had said something, done something, it would have been different. Maybe I would have been saved. But now my last lifeline was gone, and the obsession that had driven me into that darkness could now consume me whole, and I had no one to pull me back out. I became irrational, depressed, as every emotion I had ever felt was hollowed out, carved right out of my chest. Why couldn't they understand me? I thought they understood me better than anyone else in this world, it was why I loved them. Why didn't they desire the truth? How could they live knowing that the killer was still out there, the one that had broken our family? Why was I the only one that felt like this? But now there was nothing left of me except a madness and desire that consumed me from the inside out. That was why they left. I was no longer the one they had pledged their heart to. I didn't even want to be saved from that darkness, so they couldn't save me, nor did they want to watch as I fell further into that oblivion. So they left. Then I was truly alone. Chapter 36, It Has to Stop. I quickly separated myself from the collector. I was met with so many emotions, I didn't even know where to begin. My mind went out of control, and it felt like I was hyperventilating. I felt several glimmers in my family heart trying to help calm me, but rather than accept them, I felt myself pull away and hide deeper inside myself. I was frightened. I was scared of myself. Not the me now, but who I once was. The small peaks I'd had were nothing compared to what I had just witnessed. It made me not even want to be me anymore. I finally discovered the feeling I had ignored. I understood the collector's pain of not being understood, not even understanding yourself. The obsession that had gripped me ended up drowning me, and I never resurfaced. I knew from other pieces of memories that my last days had become dark and darker still, but until that moment I did not realize just how empty it had felt. With love gone, I had filled myself with a desire for revenge, which pushed away everyone left that I held dear. The obsession took over, it changed me, and no matter how much I tried to fill that hole with hate, anger, and other negativity, when I had finally completed my goal, I was empty. A mere husk of my former self. That was the result of obsession, that was what addiction did to you. No matter how much you tried to fill it, it was never enough. Even if you tried to distract yourself, or tell yourself it didn't matter, you always thought of it. It controlled every aspect of your life, even if you didn't want it to. But you did. You enjoyed the obsession, even if you hated it. Fulfilling the craving was such sweet release that it made it all worth it for a moment in time. It was not something you could escape alone. I didn't want to end up like that, letting the shame eat away at me until I was nothing but a hollow shell. When numerous hands reached out to me, I rejected them all, and only now did I see that not only do others need to reach to me, but I also need to reach back to them. I didn't know what to do. I still felt guilt towards my lizards for using them to experience all the sensations of the living, and yet, they were probably the only ones who could save me. But to reach out to their ever-open hands would mean admitting to them that I had used them. I felt little control over my own self. The black pit at my heart ached, making me feel sick. Could I really feel sick without a body? Even if I couldn't, this was surely the closest feeling I'd ever get to it, so it might as well be the same thing. I tried to focus on other things, ignoring what I had learned about myself and the fate that awaited me. Normally, I might have given in completely to that impulse, but some part of me held back. I had been so thoroughly affected by that memory that it was impossible to forget. Even now I wondered how I had not remembered that in the first place when I had first awoken. It had been the last great failure in my life, and everything went downhill from there. My partner had closed the door behind them, and I stayed shut inside until the very end, convinced of my own righteousness. Before my passing, drained of all emotion and nearly all life, my last thought, the one that was still pure and untainted before I marred it and tortured and rent it asunder, was but a simple one. I wanted to see my child again. The anguish at the impossibility of it was what drove me down the dark path of no return. Even now, with only fragments and pieces of memories, that desire held on strongly. It was the same desire that connected me to my lizards, the fear of separation from them, not wanting to part with them. Through the sadness and pain, I came to laugh at my own self. Just what was I doing? I wanted to see them again, I wanted to be with them, and never be apart from them. And yet, here I was, separating myself from them out of fear of the unknown, the fear that they would separate themselves from me. The contradiction was so apparent to me now that it was just as amusing as it was shameful. A bit of calm spread through me. Of all my desires, the one to see them grow and thrive was the strongest, much stronger than my addiction to the pleasures of the flesh. When I connected with the thrill seeker, it was to be one with him, our desires intertwined, not to use him for my own shameful whimsy. Just when had it contorted into such an ugly addiction? I didn't even know. It was a strange thing. Realizing the truth behind my obsession, the original pure desire, somehow put me at ease. Peeling back the layers, removing all the fears, delusions, and tainted pieces, I knew now what was most important. It had to stop here. If it didn't stop now, it never would. With a confidence I didn't even know I had, I left my shell, re-establishing my connection to all my lizards simultaneously. What I found were many hands still reaching out to me, and for the first time since I fell into my addiction, I reached back. Chapter 37, A New Answer. Make no mistake, the fear in my heart was still very real, but the calm of finally making my decision and putting my first foot forward, though the next may falter, was uplifting. It was almost refreshing confessing my sins, no longer having to hide it beneath obscurity, and the world seemed all the more bright and vivid for it. I never communicated with my lizards through discussions, such a thing was impossible. The family heart could only carry emotion and intention. It was free of deception, but could not impart details. They would never know the whole truth of my transgressions until such a day that we could actively speak to each other. And while they knew my feelings came not from an individual lizard, but the core of the family heart, I was still something of a mysterious and unifying existence to them. It was rare for me to speak to all of them as I did in my confession, and it caused all activity to cease. I could feel fear and anger come through the family heart, directed at none other than myself. I couldn't blame them. Of those that could understand the most, some felt insecure and drew away from the family heart. The children who had a harder time comprehending the complex feelings were mostly confused, and huddled with their families for comfort. I had done wrong by them, I had gone from a caring overseer to a selfish intruder. The guilt I had already been feeling was amplified by their reaction, and I was truly ashamed. My entire existence quivered under their judgment. But the feeling I feared most, the desire to separate, never came. True, some drew away, but they never cut themselves off completely. Mostly, it seemed, they needed time to come to terms with my transgressions, made all the more difficult with my shapelessness and their inability to directly interact with me face to face. The greatest surprise, however, came from two lizards, those I had given a name. The thrill seeker, who was now greatly aged, and the collector both recognized me. I could feel them both reach out to me, their desire to touch me greater than any other. I was shocked, and didn't know how to respond. I had always been the one reaching through the family heart out to them, and while the group as a whole would sometimes calm my raging emotions, it was just because some member of their extended family was feeling great pain, great enough to resonate through the heart. But the thrill seeker and the collector were different. Although they had been vaguely aware of my presence before, my confession gave some amount of form to the being that had helped connect them to their desires. It was through my body stealing that they had both come to realize more about themselves, and achieved goals they had thought to be an impossible dream. And I came to find, they were trying to thank me. I was dumbfounded, caught completely off guard. I'd done this horrible thing, and I was being thanked for it. Amidst feelings of remorse and confusion there was also elation. Even though I'd done wrong by them, my actions had still produced positive results, enough for some be grateful. Could it be that my actions were not wholly wrong, just misguided? I had thought I would never invade their bodies again after this, but now I was reconsidering my way of thinking. The biggest problem was the addiction, and using their bodies for my own personal gain without their knowledge. What if instead I asked for permission, and used the ability the way it was meant to be used, such as when I helped the thrill-seeker bond with his quick spring? Could that be the answer? The more I thought about it, the stronger my connection became with the thrill-seeker and the collector. It was almost like communicating with them directly. I had thought such a thing impossible, but was it really? Even if it was only by these two, I was being seen as an individual. To them, I was not just the family heart, but an actual being. My presence was being validated beyond a mere idea or shared cultural phenomenon. I was a person. The two came to that conclusion. In that moment of our connection, of our mutually acknowledged existences, I was able to see how they saw me for the first time. To them, I was a brilliant blue light, and though I existed in all of them, I was a presence beyond that. I was more than their connection to their family and their neighbor. I was a guiding light, an inspiration, a parent, a child even. I existed both within them and without them. That was the kind of revelation they had at that moment. For the thrill-seeker, who had endured a long life, the revelation both shocked him and put him at ease. It was like he truly understood the world, because for him, I was the world. All his memories, all his thoughts, a lifetime of disappointments and achievements, of sorrow and love, flowed into me. And just as I had done for every lizard that had passed before him, I accepted him into my being with open arms. The collector never got the chance to revel in their shared revelation beyond that single moment all three of us connected together. Once again, he knew something that others did not, something they may not understand. But this time, instead of giving up hope, a small flame lit deep within him. Where before he had accepted his lonely reality, after receiving my inspiration he knew he could shape his own fate just as he could work the shape of the hot metal. The fire inside him grew as if a bellows had fanned the flame. He had given up trying to get his fellows to understand him and thus perpetuated his own isolation. And me, a being whose form could not be easily understood, even though I was different from the understanding of my lizards by leaps and bounds, I had still somehow gotten my lizards to understand my confession despite our inability to directly communicate. If one such as I could overcome such great gaps in understanding, then surely the collector was capable of such smaller feats. Once again, I served to inspire him, not through any kind of communication, but simply from my actions. It was heartening. There may well be some hope left for me after all this. And so, while I was reprimanded and chastised for my decisions, and even further for trying to hide it, there were none that thought to abandon me. Even though I had made poor, even terrible decisions, they still accepted me with all my faults. No matter my past or all the horrible memories of who I once was would change that one simple fact: I was family. I truly felt there could be no other family on this world as great as my beloved lizards. They were my happiness, my joy, my world, and my heart blossomed in love for them. I wished only that such days would continue until the end of their time. Chapter 37.5, Interlude, The Madness Moves. No 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 no. 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 They planned this. They drew us here. It's their fault. Damn them. Burn them. Bury them. They're dead, all of them. They were caught by the raging earth. Rage. They were perfect and no OOW, they're gone. Blame, disgusting, punish, torture them. Rage. The mountain, damnably mountain afire, it was in our way. Destroyed them. The mountain destroyed. Stupid. Your fault. But really, it was all too perfect, wasn't it? It appeared on the mountain, it said, let us right to it. They burned, and as soon as my army sets foot on the base, it blew its top. Come back, really, well played, well played. But they'll regret it. Haha, oh yes they will. Kill them, we'll come back stronger, and when we come back we will decimate them. This world will shake under our feet, and the wind itself will quiver in fear at our might. Not even the mighty mountain will stand in our way. Breed many. Revenge. The young will thrive. And when I find them, they will be subjugated. The Great One moved, but it was quickly rooted by the volcano. I could feel its madness even from here. Such poor planning had cost it a great number of its children, not that it ever really seemed to plan in the past. If they bothered to feel around their surroundings a bit more, it would have been obvious. The incomprehensible conqueror knew that. But there came a sudden, dark calmness about the Great One. Troublesome. Is this worry? Surely not, it merely adds new possibilities, requiring new contingencies. It is still not a threat to my children. As long as they remain up there, and we remain down here, our paths shall never cross. Even if they build machines to bring them to us, we will go where their machines cannot follow. As always, I shall watch and see what they do and plan accordingly. Our future is secured. For now. Chapter 38, Fly. I'm certain if I had still been lying in the depths of my addiction I would have missed it. The momentous occasion came not long after the collector's craft had spread throughout the colonies, replacing wooden and stone tools with hard, tempered metal. Learning the art of smelting was deduced quickly after working with the pre-smelted ore, and suddenly my lizards were finding all sorts of rocks that could be melted down and crafted into better, stronger, and harder ingots. Through experimentation of all sorts of raw materials, they found a particular one on the riverbed. It wasn't well suited to be smelted as that simply hardened it, and often trying to refire and work it from there cracked the fragile material. The clay beds had gone ignored until one ingenious lizard thought to use the malleable substance to make a specific shape. After it had dried into place, she had heated it, firming its shape, and a beautiful aesthetically pleasing bowl was made. Even the children grew to love playing with the clay, making small figures to play with. Eventually, the idea that clay held its shape rather well led to the discovery of a cast by which they could pour liquid metal into the hollow clay shape, and after it had cooled, break it open to find the hunk of metal in their desired shape. After a bit of refining, the tool was relatively pristine compared to the previously hand-molded works. They were improving by leaps and bounds. It seemed as if they discovered something new almost every day from the advent of metalworking. By the time metalworking became a part of daily colony life, the forest across the river had finally begun to regrow. Life was returning to the land once raised by the volcano, and the lizards followed it, expanding their territories back into their original homeland. While that was an event to be celebrated, it was not the most important moment of the time. It began with a tree. It was a rather tall tree in the reclaimed forest, likely one of the first to regrow out of the charred soot that eventually became fertilizer for the ground. The children of the new forest colony would often compete to see who could reach the highest point on the red-barked tree that stood at the edge of their colony. Playful flashes ran across their scales and feathers as they desperately climbed. Those from the original strain of lizards seemed to have the advantage as they possessed the strength to lift themselves from branch to branch. But those from the mountain colonies, rather than using the full force of their arm muscles to ascend, instead chose to rely upon their wing muscles. They would flap a few times to get a good leap, then hop onto the next elevated branch. Using their unfinished wings for helpful leaps was nothing new, they had been doing so for generations. Even at the riverside colony it was a common game amongst the young, and helped them develop good climbing skills, useful in hunting and gathering. Inevitably, there were some unfortunate accidents. Despite warnings of caution, children rarely heeded them in their excitement, and periodically one would fall from a great height. The sorrowful mourning for the lost young who had yet to lead a full life was always heartbreaking. The pain and sadness that passed through the family heart brought about a somber mood in the colony on those days. And it appeared on this day the same tragedy would occur. As the children goaded each other on to ever higher heights, the branches began to thin. The light snap of twigs under their weight and the creak of branches sent chills through my heart, and I attempted to reach out to them to urge them into caution. But the children were having fun, and my warnings went ignored. A particularly small mountain lizard fell behind the rush of his forest cousins, but, through sheer perseverance, managed to make it to the upper branches with them. Although the same age, those with mountain blood were predisposed to be smaller than the forest dwellers, not to mention those that lived uninhibited in the sea, and were always at a slight disadvantage for tree climbing. To many, small meant weak, so the mountain lizards always felt they had something to prove. Perhaps that was why the small mountain child continued to climb past the point where the young forest lizards had stopped. They were all young, but not stupid. Even they realized you could only go so high in the trees before the branches were too small to hold you. But the mountain lizard was lighter, and thin branches that may not have held the weight of those from the forest didn't even seem to sway under the pressure of the small feathered lizard. The others were amazed at the small one's bravery, and soon flashes of caution turned to swirls and vocalizations of cheers, urging the lizard higher and higher. With the branches so close together near the top, the small lizard had to keep his wings tucked in as much as possible so as not to snag his feathers. The colors on the scales of his cousins egged him on, and with a last small leap, he made it to the highest branch on the tallest tree in their colony. But after only a second of staring at the tops of the trees in the regrown forest, any jubilation turned to terror as the branch immediately snapped. His feet tried to grip another branch, but only succeeded in pushing him far from the trunk, far from any hope of grasping a safety line. He only saw a mess of colors as he fell past his playmates. His hands tried to reach for branches, but he was falling too fast and only managed to grab handfuls of needle leaves. It was too late. I could hardly bring myself to bear witness to another of these tragic events, but I was unable to shut eyes I did not have. As I opened my arms to receive him, and prayed for it to end with as little pain as possible, I was in no way prepared for the fate that awaited the small winged lizard. The lizard youth twisted in the air, trying to right himself like a feline would during a long fall. Used to using his wings for help with balance, he opened them. Then, feeling the slight air resistance beneath his black, shining feathers, he naturally embraced the air and spread his wings out wide. It felt like time had stopped. I could see each minute movement of his wings, every feather that braced itself against the wind, and I saw what he was instinctively trying to accomplish. I had waited for so long that I nearly forgot the reason I'd cultivated the wings in the first place. I didn't waste a second, and immediately dove into the young lizard, synchronizing myself with his body. I had just broken my vow that I would never again enter without permission, but to wait now would be to condemn him to death. I didn't want to watch another youth die, not when they could be saved. The first feeling that assaulted me was the overwhelming fear of death. It hit me like a strong tidal wave, attempting to pull my feet out from under me and drown me in its depths. But it was not my mission to comfort those feelings, not yet. I made myself focus on the body itself, choosing to ignore the raging fear. I braced myself against the wave and somehow found myself still standing. I reached into all his extremities, his arms, legs, wings, and tail. I blinded myself to the erratic shifting colors as I embedded myself into every muscle. There was a new panic buried deep beneath the fear. He knew I was there. Even during his free fall, he could still feel there was another, though not entirely foreign, heart alongside his own. With time as my enemy, I could not send him soothing waves of comfort. Instead, I engendered an even stronger feeling, one to silence all other thoughts and bring our hearts together as one. Survive. The fear which had permeated his entire body up to that point was suddenly flushed out with an onslaught of adrenaline. He wanted to survive, he wanted to live. Our desire for the same end bonded us together, and together we were one. Still off-center in his free fall, I helped him maneuver his wings to make the most of the air resistance and slow his descent, and flared out the several long feathers at the end of his tail. And once everything was in the perfect position, the air resistance that was slowing his fall suddenly turned into something entirely different: lift. The shock to his body as it suddenly lifted caused his wings to falter, but with my aid they were quickly righted. With the angle of his wings, instead of going down, he was now going forward, gliding as the air moved over his feathers just so. The ground raced by below, but all too soon another obstacle stood in our way. Although not as tall as the one from which he fell, the trees of the forest were still comparably large, and now they interrupted the young lizard's flight path straight ahead. Rather than embracing for impact, one which would surely kill him at this speed, I felt him entrust his wings to me. His faith in me sparked a feeling I hadn't had in a very, very long time, not in all my lizard's lifetimes. It was the absolute trust of a child believing in their parent. My heart contracted only for an instant before exploding with vigor. I quickly angled the wings into a nearly vertical position and felt the young lizard twist his body to follow the motion. And just like that, we were past the first tree. The forest of trees that before had seemed like an obstacle, now looked like a challenge. Together we slipped past each trunk and avoided every branch. It was terrifyingly exhilarating. He instinctively pumped his wings to create more lift, just like when he used them to jump to higher branches earlier. With my knowledge and his natural instinct, we were a team navigating a forest of danger. Dipping into a dive, pulling up to clear a branch, a flap here and there to keep the lift alive, and soon, we were clear of the trees to the open west end of the forest. The open plain before us, looking at it from above, was incredible. The young lizard was happy to be free from the danger, and eager to get onto land. But I noticed a large cloud to the north, a great puffy white cloud making its way over the plain to cast its shadow upon the earth. And it just so happened that over there, the black rock was exposed, free from the grassy sprigs and bushes where the plain met the forest. I urged him that direction. Although he didn't understand the reasoning behind the destination, he trusted my judgment. Having gotten a feel for it from battling the trees, he angled himself to the north, twisting his body with his wings, feeling the shape of the air as it caressed his feathers. He was a natural. It didn't take long to reach the exposed black rock. With the pieces of myself that existed in the world around us, I could feel it there. As we neared closer, I had the young lizard brace himself. He knew not for what, but was equally cautious and excited. Then, we entered the place where the light from the sun broke up the shadow of the cloud, and in that instant there was a rush of warm air. The powerful wind filled his wings like ship sails and lifted him high into the sky. Much like when he first met the full brunt of air resistance beneath his wings, he was shocked at the powerful feeling beneath them. But this time, instead of fearing it, he embraced it. We circled the thermal several times, gaining more altitude with every pass. The rush of wind against the feathers on his body filled him with freedom. His wings pumped with added vigor, eager to rise up and touch the clouds. But he would not rise that high this day. The thermal peaked only halfway to the white giant, and we had to continue to look at it from below. But that certainly wasn't all there was to see. We were up so high, it felt like we could see the whole world. It was breathtaking seeing it from his eyes. His heart thudded in his chest, not only from the effort to get here, but from the world as it passed by below him. He felt light as he rode the wind, rarely needing to flap, and leisurely took in all the sights to be had. The forest, the plains, the river, the mountains in the distance. The horizon at the edge of the world. It was all his for the taking, and he relished in it. This was true freedom. Soon, after the thrilling climb into the sky, he began to feel the first signs of fatigue, both mental and physical, and decided to go back to the forest below. Back to his family, so he could tell him all the wonders he had seen. This would not be his last time riding high in the sky, it was merely the first trip of many to the domain of the clouds. He would return soon enough. And together, we flew. Chapter 39, A Word for Flight. After the little flyer had fallen and subsequently taken off between the trees, the other lizard youths immediately scrambled down the great tree, raising a racket of colors and sounds. The adult lizards, particularly the child's 5 parents, and slew of older siblings, were fraught with worry. The children had a hard time describing what had happened after the fall. The closest word they had was the color pattern for flying insect and tree-leaping animal, which didn't make a lot of sense. Despite the large wings of their mountain heritage hanging from their backs, which dragged their longest feathers behind them on the ground if they weren't careful, they did not know the true purpose behind them. Wing hop was one of the only words they'd invented for the use of their wings. Over an hour passed, and no one knew where the little flyer had gone. They feared him dead, but their connection through the family heart told them otherwise. Meanwhile, the little flyer was trying to navigate his way back. During the bliss of true flight high above the ground, he hadn't realized just how far he'd gone away from his forest. He was not used to seeing the world from above, and all landmarks he might have recognized to point the way home were unknown from this angle. He at least made for the treeline separating the forest from the plains, and hoped he could find his way back from there. Thankfully, I was there with him. I helped him keep his orientation, and when he drifted astray, I gave him a little push in the right direction. To him, it was likely no more than getting a bad feeling going a certain way. I could have just shown him how to get home, but some part of me refrained. Although I guided him, it was indirectly, and I hoped he'd learn from constantly surveying his surroundings rather than blindly following my instructions. I did not want to become a crutch upon which the lizards depended, but a conscience when they had doubts, an inspiration from which they could grow, and a guiding light when they were lost in the dark, just like they had been for me. Finally the little flyer came upon a sight he knew well, the large tree from which he fell. He tipped his wings and curved around the towering tree, eventually landing on one of the upper branches, not the skinny ones he broke at the top, but the safe ones a little below. He scanned the sparse green branches, but didn't see his friends on any of the lower limbs. He started to hop back down, branch to branch, and then suddenly seemed to remember he had another option for getting down to the ground. He took to a particularly thick limb and hopped over to the edge before spreading his wings and letting the wind resistance do the rest. He floated slowly down, moving in the direction of the colony, a route he was quite familiar with. The little flyer alighted on the forest floor after taking his easy descent to the ground and came upon a big cacophony of sounds and lights. He slinked his way into the crowd, trying to see what everyone was kicking up a fuss over. One of the young adult lizards next to him took a glance at him, then did a double take. He suddenly made a surprised vocalization in the little flyer's direction, causing the youth to shrink back from the abrupt outburst. Suddenly he was the center of attention in his immediate area, swirls and patterns of surprise and inquiry all clamoring towards him. It made him want to run and hide, but after the initial surprise subsided, he found looks of relief and elation among the crowd. This only served to confuse him more, and bewildered colors graced his head, wondering what exactly was going on. Before anyone could answer, the crowd was pushed apart, and there appeared his 3 mothers and 2 fathers, along with a gaggle of his siblings. They all took him into a huge group hug, one that nearly choked the life out of him. The same looks of relief graced the feathers of his entire family. After taking a moment to indulge in the overflowing love coming from them, he released a curious chirp, still confused by the whole situation. 2 of his parents gave each other a look, while the other 3 took a moment to bombard him with questions. Where had he been? Was he all right? Were all his feathers still intact? The little flyer didn't know where to start, and during the time that passed in which he didn't answer, even more questions arose. Finally, the first 2 parents calmed their partner's relentless interrogation of their young son. Colors of impatience caressed their shoulders, but they held back to give the young lizard a moment to breathe. After a moment of rest, with the entirety of his colony looking at him, his calmer parents asked him simply to tell them what happened. The little flyer started with the race to climb the tree. He very quickly added that he knew his parents had told him to be careful when climbing, but in the heat of the moment, the desire to win and prove himself had overtaken his common sense. He knew he was likely to be scolded later for that, but continued on with his tale. Upon surpassing the other youths, reaching one of the highest branches, he looked out over the forest but for a moment. The branch underneath his feet snapped, and try as he might, he could not grab hold of a lifeline. What happened next was a little fuzzy, and the way he described it was the family heart pouring out from his chest and gently wrapping him in its embrace. He used the term for the heart connection that the lizards had with their quick springs, and even though it was just him, it felt like he was truly riding with someone. And then, suddenly he was not falling down, but up. And then forward. The ground no longer posed a threat so much as the trees, and he weaved in and out of them, careful not to crash. Some of the quick spring riders nodded in recognition at that same feeling they had when riding their mounts through the denser parts of the forest, excitement and panic heightening the senses, bringing the 2 closer together in their endeavor to navigate the trees. And then he came to the part where he broke through the trees and was in the air over the vast plains. Falling up and in the air didn't quite capture the meaning of what he was doing, and many lizards didn't understand what he meant. He recounted the urge he received, then, still under the protection of the family heart, he came upon a great gust of wind that took him high into the sky, and he saw the whole world from on high. He was very enthusiastic about that last part as it still held him in awe when he recalled it. Even though he'd been the one to experience it, he still almost couldn't believe it. Still the lizards were confused. His parents brought up the flying insect and tree-leaping animal the other youths had used to describe his action. The words were both right and not right. Even the little flyer couldn't think of a good way to describe it beyond what he'd already told them. One of his siblings then asked if he could show them instead. The three overprotective parents immediately raised a ruckus at the idea of their son performing a death-defying act once more, but he was already scrambling for a nearby tree before they even realized he was gone. They vocalized cries of fear and anger as across their feathers came quick and distressed calls for him to halt his actions. A couple lizards even crawled up after him to bring him back down to safety. He only went to a low branch, one he could easily jump down from. Then, he hesitated for a moment. He had been excited to show everyone his ability to be in the air, but when it came time to jump off the branch and spread his wings in front of everyone, the suppressed fear of falling from the tallest tree suddenly assaulted him. What if it had all been a dream and he couldn't really stay in the air? Doubts plagued his heart. Then he did something I did not expect. He reached out through the family heart to me. I did not immediately respond as I was too dumbfounded to do much of anything. I had always reached out to them, but it was still so new for them to do the same, I just wasn't used to it. The way his heart fumbled around trying to locate me at the core of their connected hearts amazed me as I watched. It was touching in a way I couldn't describe, that he sought me out for comfort and a boost of confidence. Not his family, but me, and I felt my heart welling up with all sorts of chaotic and loving emotions. I gently grasped his heart as if I were taking hold of his hand. I wrapped him once again in my embrace, not to control his wings, but to ease his fears that if he fell, I would catch him. Just as the lizards behind him caught up, he suddenly leaped from the branch, brilliant confidence exuding from every feather. His wings opened in a brilliant display, the black feathers dancing with colors of excitement and wonder. Fear immediately shot through the family heart from many lizards, mostly from the adults, but fear soon turned to surprise as he did not fall, but instead stayed up in the air. He glided around this cleared edge of the colony in a few circles, slowly descending. He flapped his wings a few times which caused outbursts of shock. The winged lizards felt their own wings itch at the familiar wing hop action. Although not long in the air, he had thoroughly amazed everyone and broken their concept of their own limitations. He landed in the embrace of his largest mother who used her own wings to steady herself from the light impact. No one spoke for a very long time, though colors of emotions were rampant. Soon, no one could contain it any longer and broke into clamor. How did he do that? How did he stay in the air without falling? Did he really go that high in the sky? The questions were endless. One of the older and most well-respected lizards of the colony came to the young flyer. He was one of those that didn't speak often, for when he did, his words had great impact on those around him. He ignored the noisy discord, and as he came to speak, the roar of sound and color immediately quieted, all eager to see what he had to say. "Young lizard," he began, "you have shown us today the likes of which we have never seen before. But I have no doubt the future will soon be full of lizards in our vast sky above the trees. Tell me, what would you call what you have accomplished?" Though his scales were old, they were more brilliant and pronounced than any other, and the control he had over the minutest color demonstrated the prowess of his scale-singing days. The little flyer thought to himself for several moments, wondering how to put the feeling he felt into words that others could understand. The lizards around him waited in anticipation, eager to see the birth of a new word for their community. Even the wind in the leaves and the animals in the trees seemed to recognize the momentous occasion, and the whole forest quieted. The young lizard's mind wandered to his memories of the event, especially when he had risen towards the clouds. The view from up on high had almost felt like he was in another world, and suddenly he knew how to describe his deed. It began as a mixture of blues and greens, accompanied by interlacing bright yellows, that then cascaded from his shoulders down to his forearms, with a few strokes fanning out on his chest. It was a combination of several words that together meant, to break free from the world. And that became my lizard's word for flight. Chapter 40, The Last Vestige of Self. Free from the chains that bound nearly all creatures to the world below, a lone lizard floated high in the sky. The supply pack slung across his chest was a bit heavy, but not enough to bring him down from the air. He was part of the survey team, one of the first from the Little Flyers colony, and he was currently on a scouting mission. After discovering the advantage of being able to see the world from above, and traveling at a speed unhindered by terrestrial obstacles, the mountain lizard's newly discovered ability to fly was seen as integral to the future of the lizards. The children of the Little Flyers generation adapted very quickly to sky travel, the adults much less so. Everyone with wings wanted to fly, however, because mixed lineages were very common, only those with more pure mountain bloodlines were capable. If the wings were too small, or the bones too heavy, they wouldn't be able to get themselves off the ground. This surveyor himself was a couple generations younger than the Little Flyer, and had learned flight from one of his students. With the founding of the survey team, they managed to create more accurate maps of the lizard's current colonies and lands, as well as find new areas fit for colonization. This surveyor, however, was going much further than usual. Up until now, they'd mostly flown over their lands and those close by, but the colonies were now feeling the need to discover more. What more was out there, they wondered, beyond the angry mountain that drove their ancestors from their once lost, now reclaimed, homes? The world from the sky was vast, farther than the eye could see, and every time they tried to touch to horizon, it kept extending beyond their reach. The surveyor wasn't the fastest flyer, but what he lacked in speed he made up for in stamina, something greatly needed for long flights. He was adept at finding thermals to lessen the burden on his wings, and conserved his energy efficiently. Never in a rush, the surveyor always took his time, sometimes to the point of laziness. Despite his carefree and relaxed attitude, he was by far the perfect lizard for the job. His colony had always seen the great mountain from afar, but as he got nearer to it, he could appreciate just how massive it was. It dwarfed the Riverside Mountains by a huge degree, such that the surveyor thought it might never end. He took a short reprieve near the top of the caldera, and gazed out over the landscape. From the height of the towering mountain, it was nearly the same view the surveyor had when flying. He looked back towards his home colony, now so far away. Even on this clear day, he couldn't even see the faded silhouette of the Riverside Mountains. Although his insulated feathers kept him warm, stopping for too long to sightsee began to make him shiver, so he quickly ate some of his dried fruits and meats and resumed his journey. No longer looking back, but forward, he took in the first sights of the other side of the great mountain. It was a proud moment in their exploration, and although his family was far away, they could still dimly feel his elation through their family heart. He leisurely dropped down from the top of the mountain. His altitude was fairly low as he followed the mountainside descent, but it didn't detract at all from the splendor of seeing new lands. Once he reached the base, he climbed a bit into the air and let himself feel the wind, trying to find a good place for thermals to form so he could quickly propel himself back into the sky again. He was still fairly high above the tree line, but this low he couldn't get a great view of the landscape just yet. However, in an instant, everything, absolutely everything, changed. I felt it just before it hit, a slight quiver in the air. Something came flying at high speed out of the brush from below. As fast as I tried to give a flash of warning to the surveyor, the projectile was faster, and it sank itself deep into the shoulder of his wing. He dropped fast, spiraling out of the sky, the acute pain blinding him to his surroundings. The world twisted and turned about, and the blue of the sky began to meld into the green of the forest below. His tail was ripped from the raging winds, and he couldn't get a good enough grip on the air to expand his tail feathers. The left wing hit by the projectile was getting flung around just as much as his tail, further injuring it, but he had little control over it anymore. If he couldn't slow down his landing, he'd perish instantly upon impact. I requested control. A feeling of urgency entered his heart as I begged him to let me help. I felt the small wall that protected the deepest parts of himself open up to me, and I immediately spread myself through him. The pain was terrible. It was so loud, I couldn't choose to ignore it even if I wanted to. But knowing the fate that awaited him, and aligning myself with his own desire to live, together we both steadfastly held onto his injured wing, keeping it in place just before hitting the ground. However, we weren't able to get horizontal soon enough, and as the ground rushed up, he tried to put out his feet to halt his speeding landing. But the momentum was too much. The ground gripped at his feet, hanging onto them, but the rest of his body continued to plunge forward with enough force to rip those very feet from the ground. He tumbled, wing over foot, trying to come to a stop. His wings instinctively tried to close, but the control over the left was lost amidst the wild rolling over the ground. I both felt and heard the humorous break. The pain that had entered his body was now excruciating. Although he had wounds all over his body, his mind couldn't process anything more than the pain in his wing. Wild flashes sparked all over his scales as nonsensical screams rolled over his feathers in an array of light. He couldn't even bring any sound out from his throat, the pain was so intense. It eventually grew to be too much, and he completely blacked out. I released myself from the darkness of his unconscious mind, relieved to be free of the physical pain, but at the same time loathing myself for the moment of jubilation. Instead of continuing to depreciate myself, I took the next moment to look over his injuries. My heart sank. The injury of the wing was one thing, but the crash landing had taken its toll as well. Many cuts and scrapes appeared on flesh made visible from torn scales and feathers. The inky bluish pink of his skin that should never be exposed was brought to light. He needed help, and badly. Out here on his own, he was vulnerable to predators. I began to shift my focus back to the colony to give them the message. Then I noticed something. Although broken off now, I could see something sticking out from the surveyor's wing. The projectile was a thin, but smooth piece of wood, broken on both ends on either side of the wing, no doubt from the terrible tumble. The bushes nearby began to rustle faintly, and instantly my full attention came back to the surveyor. Normally, I might have thought it was the wind, but it was strangely quiet here. No other animals made any noise, not even the smallest insect. I was on high alert, concentrating on the surroundings. It was only then that I saw a foot begin to exit the brush. The creature that exited the brush was like none I had ever seen before. It was tall, taller than my lizard, and incredibly stocky. Its entire body appeared to be made of muscle, its bluish-gray skin taut against its torso and arms. What I found truly strange was that it walked on two legs. So far, only my lizards appeared capable of this feat, but now, here, was another creature that could do the same. Its head appeared small in comparison to its large, muscular body, and the face was very flat, nothing like the long snout of my lizards. The eyes were small, and when it opened its mouth to breathe, its teeth were all misaligned. In addition to the teeth, the overall form appeared lopsided. Even the most perfect bodies weren't truly symmetrical, but the asymmetry was negligible at best, and hardly noticeable at worst. However, in this massive bluish-gray creature, almost everything seemed to be slightly off compared to its other side. It was a wonder how its body functioned properly considering all the maligned shapes. It was like it had been put together to be purely functional, and aesthetics had been all but forgotten. Yet, above all that was a deep-seated worry, not for its strange, irregular shape, but for the fact that it had hide strewn across its body, and a large piece of shaved wood in its hand. Clothing. Weapons. Those were the words that came to me. Fear. Curiosity. Those were the feelings that entered my heart. This was not just some creature living out in the woods on the other side of the volcano. This was a being of intelligence, with culture, just like my lizards. It was then that I felt it. Upon that realization, I could feel something in the background. Something was with this creature. It was very quiet, but it was there. It watched me, staring at me through the eyes of this creature. I knew that gaze, but it had been a long time since I last felt it. The eyes of the hills. My mind went blank. I couldn't bring myself to think of anything from the shock. In just that short instant I immediately understood. The presence that had filled me with dread so long ago, it was just like me. And this creature was its creature, just like my lizards were mine. There were others like me out there. That revelation hit me deep in my core. I had never even tried to look for others, the thought hadn't even crossed my mind, not even when I'd first encountered the eyes of the hills. The last time, I had reached out of my own accord only to run away, but this time it had come to me. As I laid in my stupor, the hulking creature came over to the surveyor and poked at it gently with the club in its hand. This small action was enough to rouse the lizard, though the sudden consciousness was unwelcome. Pain was at the forefront of his thoughts. He could barely open his eyes, but when he saw that bare bluish-gray foot in front of his face, his adrenaline kicked in, and he sat up quickly and instantly regretted it. Still, the adrenaline had numbed his pain to an extent, and his heart raced as he tried to make sense of the creature he saw before him, just as I had. He seemed to recognize the clothing it wore, just like me, and was filled with the same curiosity. He then ran a plea for help across his feathers, lighting up his face and wings. Light. It makes light with its body. Something invaded my thoughts. It was almost as if I were thinking those words myself, but I knew I wasn't. There was a strange hum in the background of my consciousness, almost a buzzing noise. The creature is injured. It is weak. This one's creature is strong. More strange words in my own voice entered my mind. I wanted to plug my ears if only I knew how. The foreign contaminate plagued my mind in its droll, lifeless voice of observation. The new one is confused. It uses many words. The other one also uses many words. Is the new one like the other one? The new one? The other one? Many words? Was it talking about me? It seemed absurd, and yet I couldn't completely denounce the idea. But how was it hearing my words? And then it hit me. I was hearing its words. By that same logic, it must be hearing mine as well. It made sense, but it still felt very strange, almost surreal. I wondered what it was, where it came from. This one is this one. This one comes from beyond the hills. The new one has much confusion. It has many questions. It answered me. The eyes of the hills, calling itself this one, actually answered me. From thought to thought, it understood my mind. I barely even noticed as the buzzing began to grow louder. It was right, I had so many questions. And I wasn't the only one. The eyes of the hills creature tilted its head to the side at my lizard's light show along his feathered scales. Confusion. It made a noise with its throat and moved its lips as it poked my lizard lightly with its club, seeming to want to understand what he was. The surveyor also tried to respond with vocalizations, but couldn't quite match the deep thrumming of the tall creature. It was almost comical watching the two go back and forth, trying to match each other's sounds. I almost laughed, but then a deep rumbling came from within the earth. The world was shaking, crumbling, falling apart. The sky rent asunder, and my entire world seemed to fall into a vast emptiness filled with nothing but noise and agony. My vision was cut off from the world. I could no longer see what the surveyor was seeing, or hear what he was hearing. Static entered my mind at such a volume I thought my whole being would burst. The onslaught of distortion was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. Found you. I found Kiliu. Foundy, submit yourself to me. Submit, submit, subjugate, submit. The noise was deafening. The worst part was that it seemed to come from my own mind. It was difficult to even think clearly. It invaded, threatening to encompass my entire being. My thoughts no longer felt like my own. Submit. It hurt. I was in pain. I just wanted it to stop. It was almost as if. Submit yourself. Ah. I couldn't even think. Its words were penetrating my every thought. Subimi thuradi it. No. Please make it stop. Quit stalling. 1. Answer me.